No one has ever told you this directly, but the truth is simple and uncomfortable. It's not the world that's preventing you from growing, it's how you react to it. While you try to be understood, accepted, validated, you are, without realizing it, handing your energy over to anyone or any situation that knows how to provoke you. And here's the point that few dare to admit. Whoever doesn't control their own emotions will always be controlled by someone more strategic. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. It's not about being cold out of ego, but about being precise for survival. Because in the real game, the one that no one explains, power doesn't lie with whoever feels more, but with whoever knows what to do with what they feel. Now think about it. How many decisions have you made on impulse and then paid the price? How many times have you overreacted, over-explained yourself, overexposed yourself, and realized too late that you lost control of the situation? This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern, and patterns create destiny. Most people live like this, reacting, justifying, trying to please, while few learn to observe, filter, and act strategically. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is that the world respects those who respect themselves first. And that starts with something no one can do for you: inner mastery. Because when you learn to control your emotions, you cease to be predictable. And when you cease to be predictable, you begin to have power. But here comes the turning point that changes everything. Controlling emotions isn't about erasing yourself, it's about directing them. It's not about ceasing to feel, it's about ceasing to be dominated by what you feel. And when you learn this, something silent happens. Your energy stops being wasted, your presence changes, your decisions become more precise, and little by little, the world begins to react differently to you. Not because you asked for respect, but because you've become someone impossible to ignore. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack here. Not with pretty theory, but with principles that, if applied, completely change the way you play this game. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos. It's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now, not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. He wakes up early, grabs his phone, repeats the same movements, and when he realizes it, the day is already over. But nothing really happened. It's as if he's living on autopilot, without direction, without presence, without purpose. Most men live like this, like modern sleepwalkers, trapped in a routine they never truly chose. And here's something that's already implicit. Decisions based on real human nature are rare. Most people simply react to their environment. Machiavelli understood this long before neuroscience existed. The life of someone who doesn't think is always led by someone who does. And in this silent game, those who don't wake up become pawns, not players. The problem isn't the routine itself. The problem is not knowing why you're in it. Working, studying, relationships, all of this can be strategic or completely empty. It depends on the level of consciousness. And the hard truth, most people prefer not to think, because thinking demands responsibility, and responsibility demands action. Now observe, the man who lives like this begins to accept anything. Any job, any relationship, any mediocre standard. He loses the ability to question. And when he loses that, he loses power. Machiavelli spoke of politics guided by reality, not by ideals. And this applies directly here. The reality is that no one will wake you up. No one will knock on your door and say, "Hey, you're wasting your life." On the contrary, the system prefers you asleep, because a conscious man is unpredictable. He questions, he breaks patterns, he demands more, and that bothers people. So the game is silent. They keep you busy, distracted, and tired. And when you realize it, years have passed, without real construction, without mastery, without direction, just repetition. But there is a breaking point, a moment when something inside him begins to bother him, small at first, almost imperceptible. A strange discomfort at seeing other people evolving, building, mastering areas of life. And then the question that changes everything arises: why not me? This is the first sign that he is waking up. And here comes Virtu and Fortuna. Luck is not enough. Strategic action is needed. Starting small is already an act of rebellion against this automatic life. Reading 10 pages a day, training the body, studying something that truly adds value. These are small breaks in the pattern, and that is exactly what separates the common man from the man who builds power. Because while most sleep, some begin to open their eyes. And when that happens, a new war begins, not outside, but within him. Now he realizes he was sleeping, but that doesn't mean he's free. In fact, this is where the real game begins, because the greatest enemy has never been the outside world. It's that inner version that always negotiates with comfort. That voice that says, "Leave it for tomorrow. You deserve to rest. This isn't for you." It seems innocent, but it's strategic and extremely dangerous. Machiavelli spoke of the calculated use of force, and here that force needs to be used against oneself, against one's own impulses, against one's own weakness, disguised as logic. Most lose not because they lack opportunity, but because they lack inner control. And that requires something rare, awareness plus action, because it's no use knowing if you continue to obey that weak version of yourself. And the most interesting or disturbing thing is that this war is invisible. No one sees when he decides not to train. No one sees when he avoids a difficult conversation. No one sees when he chooses immediate pleasure over growth. But each of these decisions builds a pattern, and patterns become destiny. Decisions based on real human nature show that human beings tend towards comfort, not evolution. Therefore, those who want to grow need to go against their own programming. And that's not pretty, it's not motivational, it's uncomfortable. It's waking up early when you don't want to. It's studying when you're tired. It's saying no when everyone expects a yes. A practical example. While many spend hours on social media, he decides to study finance, communication, or even read works like The Prince by Machiavelli or Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Small choices, but with a brutal impact over time. And little by little he realizes something powerful. This weak version begins to lose strength, not because it disappeared, but because it stopped being obeyed. This changes everything. Because now he doesn't react, he chooses. And here comes an essential principle. It's better to be feared than loved, even by oneself. He begins to respect himself more than to seek comfort. And this creates a solid foundation. But this transformation brings an inevitable side effect. He begins to distance himself from certain patterns, certain people, certain dynamics. Because you can't grow while maintaining the same environment. And that's exactly where the next layer of the game comes in, where he realizes he can no longer put himself last without paying a high price. When he begins to win this internal war, a new discomfort arises, almost like a breakdown of identity. because for a long time he was conditioned to please, to yield, to put himself last. And this was seen as virtue. But in practice, it was just well-disguised weakness. The appearance of virtue, as Machiavelli already warned, can be a dangerous trap. Because the man who lives to please loses respect, first from others, then from himself. And the world doesn't reward blind sacrifice. It rewards perceived value. When he always says yes, when he always adapts, when he never sets limits, he ceases to be a priority even in his own life. And the hardest part, people get used to it quickly. They no longer see effort, they see obligation. And obligation doesn't generate respect, it generates exploitation. And here comes a strategic shift. He understands that prioritizing himself isn't selfishness, it's intelligent survival. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. The reality is simple. Those who don't value themselves are devalued. So he starts changing small behaviors. He starts saying no without over-justifying. He starts protecting his time as if it were money, because ultimately it's even more valuable. A practical example. Instead of accepting any invitation or interruption, he defines focus blocks for the day. 1 hour studying something that increases his income, 40 minutes training his body, 20 minutes reading something that strengthens his mind, like The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. This seems simple, though, but it completely changes how he is perceived. Because now he has direction, and those who have direction don't beg for attention. But this change comes at an emotional price. Some people will be bothered. Others will say he changed, and he really did change, because now he understands that avoiding being hated doesn't mean pleasing everyone. It means not being weak enough to be exploited. And that's a subtle but powerful point. He begins to build boundaries, and boundaries create respect. But by speaking less, by exposing himself less, by ceasing to justify every decision, something even more interesting begins to happen. He starts to be observed in a different way, more silent, more firm, more difficult to read. And at that moment, without fully realizing it, he begins to access one of the most underestimated weapons of power: silence. At this point in his journey, he has already realized something that most people ignore their entire lives. Those who talk too much expose themselves too much, and those who expose themselves too much lose power. Silence, contrary to what many think, is not absence. It's strategy. Machiavelli already understood this when talking about the appearance of virtue and the calculated use of force. Not all force needs to be shown. Sometimes the greatest mastery lies precisely in not reacting. While many feel the need to opine on everything, justify everything, prove everything, he observes, he analyzes, he absorbs, and this creates an aura that few can explain, but everyone feels. Because silence generates mystery, and mystery generates respect. Those who speak little are not easily predictable, and the unpredictable always carries power. And here's a detail that separates the amateur from the strategist. Silence isn't passivity, it's control. He doesn't remain silent out of insecurity, but by choice. He understands that words are currency, and spending too much devalues them. A practical example: in a discussion, while the other person tries to win through volume or emotion, he slows down. He listens more than he speaks. He responds with few words, but precise ones. This completely breaks the pattern, because the other person expects a reaction and receives control. In professional environments, this becomes even more visible. While many try to stand out in meetings, he only speaks when he has something relevant, and when he speaks, he's direct. This makes his presence more significant. Decisions based on real human nature show that those who speak less tend to be heard more, precisely because they don't trivialize their own voice. But there's an even deeper level to all of this. Silence also protects. It protects plans, intentions, and strategic moves. A loyal and dedicated armies don't announce their moves before battle. They act. And this principle applies to life. One begins to share less about their objectives, less about their next steps, less about their vulnerabilities, not out of paranoia, but out of intelligence. Because not everyone needs to know. Not everyone deserves access, and the less accessible one becomes, the more value their presence carries. But this silence, combined with prioritization and internal control, begins to generate an inevitable effect. It becomes more solid, more structured. And this opens space for something even more dangerous or powerful, depending on how it's used. The construction of something that no one can replace. After learning to be silent, observe, and act with precision, he begins to see a truth that few dare to face. The world doesn't value effort, it values utility. No matter how hard he tries, if what he does can be easily replaced, he will always be treated as disposable. It's harsh, but it's real. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. Machiavelli already pointed out that power is never just in the intention, it's in the concrete capacity to influence results. And this requires something that most avoid: real competence, not superficial, not mediocre, but deep enough to generate dependence. Because whoever masters a rare skill doesn't ask for space, he occupies it. And in this game, the end justifies the means when it comes to building legitimate value. He understands that he needs to stop just consuming and start producing something that sets him apart. And here comes the practical part that separates those who watch from those who build. He begins to choose areas with high market value and high scarcity. Persuasive communication, high-level video editing, copywriting, finance, sales, technology. It doesn't matter exactly which one. What matters is that it's useful and difficult to replace. A direct example. While many just watch videos, he begins to study copywriting in depth, understanding mental triggers, testing headlines, creating scripts. Or he dives into advanced editing, learning to create videos that truly capture attention, like the styles used by viral channels. Or he begins to study investments in a practical way, analyzing companies, understanding cash flow, evaluating assets. This is virtue, skill built with intention. And when he finds the right opportunity, fortune, he is already prepared. Constant adaptability becomes part of the process. He doesn't wait for the perfect moment. He prepares for any moment. And gradually something changes in how he is perceived. People begin to seek him out, not out of sympathy, but out of value. And this completely changes the dynamic. Better to be feared than loved takes on a new meaning here. It's not about literal fear, but about respect for competence. He ceases to be just another one and becomes necessary. And when someone becomes necessary, the game changes. But this construction requires consistency, and consistency requires control. Because along the way, distractions, emotions, and impulses arise that try to divert him. And that's exactly where many fall. Because they may have skill, but they lack emotional control. And without that, everything else silently crumbles. At this stage, he has already built something valuable, but he discovers a dangerous detail. It's no use having skill if you don't have control, because a single impulsive reaction can destroy months or years of work. Uncontrolled emotion is a leakage of power. And the worst part, most people don't even realize when they are giving away that power. Machiavelli already understood that decisions based on real human nature need to consider something simple. Human beings are emotional by nature, but the strategist acts despite this. It's not about becoming a robot, but about not being dominated by impulses. anger, anxiety, the need for validation. All of this, when exposed without a filter, reveals weakness. And weakness, in the game of real life, is exploited. Always. The man who doesn't control what he feels ends up being controlled by those who know how to provoke those emotions. And here comes a practical shift that changes everything. He begins to observe his own emotional patterns as if he were analyzing another person. When something irritates him, he doesn't react immediately. He pauses, literally. He breathes, steps back, buys time. It seems simple, but it's one of the greatest demonstrations of inner power. A direct example. In a negotiation or discussion, when someone tries to provoke him, he doesn't engage. While the other person raises their voice, he lowers it. While the other person tries to pressure him, he slows down. This completely breaks the dynamic, because whoever controls the pace controls the situation. Another example. He stops making important decisions in moments of emotion. No closing deals in euphoria, nor making decisions in anger. He waits for his emotional state to stabilize and only then decides. This is calculated use of force, applied internally. And over time, something interesting happens. He becomes harder to reach, more stable, more predictable to himself, and unpredictable to others. This creates a solid foundation of respect. Avoiding being hated here takes on a new layer. It's not about pleasing, but about not reacting in a way that puts you in a position of weakness. But this emotional stability also brings a new challenge, because as he becomes more controlled, more focused, more disciplined, he begins to realize that not everyone around him is on the same wavelength. And that starts to weigh on him, because in the end, nobody grows alone. And that's exactly where one of the most underestimated and most dangerous decisions a man can make comes in, who he chooses to walk with. Now he has control, skill, and direction, but he realizes something many ignore until it's too late. No one rises alone when surrounded by people who pull them down. And this doesn't happen in an obvious way. It's not someone saying, "Don't grow." It's more subtle. Small comments, veiled jokes, lack of support, absence of ambition. And when he realizes it, he's surrounded by people living on the same autopilot he tried to escape. Machiavelli already said that having your own loyal armies is fundamental. And in real life, this translates into strategic relationships, because the environment shapes behavior, and behavior shapes destiny. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. No matter how much he wants to evolve, if the environment doesn't keep up, he will be pulled back. And here comes the uncomfortable part. He begins to reassess who is around him, not arrogantly but clearly. Who truly adds value, who encourages growth, who shares similar values, and most importantly, who drains his energy. A practical example? If he wants to grow financially, it makes more sense to be around people who talk about business, investments, and income generation than people who only complain or live in the moment. If he wants to evolve mentally, he starts consuming different content, frequenting different environments, even changing his references. Reading books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, or following people who have already reached where he wants to be. This changes the game, because the brain begins to normalize a new pattern. Constant adaptability comes into play again. He doesn't cling to the old environment just for emotional comfort, and inevitably this creates distance. Some connections weaken, others disappear, and that hurts more than he imagined. Because growing up also means leaving behind old versions of himself, and often people who were part of that version. But he understands something essential. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean living alone, but rather not accepting just any company to avoid being alone. He begins to build a more selective, more aligned, more strategic circle. And this accelerates everything, but at the same time, it creates a new layer of complexity. Because the more he evolves, the less predictable he becomes, and the less people can understand him. And it is precisely at this point that an even more refined, almost invisible strategy emerges, one that few master, becoming unreadable. At this point, he has already realized that growing up isn't just about evolving. It's also about learning not to expose himself completely, because the more predictable he becomes, the easier it is to manipulate, anticipate, and control him. And here comes one of the most silent principles of power, being unreadable. Machiavelli already spoke about the appearance of virtue, showing what is convenient, hiding what is strategic. This isn't falsehood, it's applied intelligence. Most people give everything away, plans, emotions, intentions, weaknesses, and in doing so, they also give away control. He, however, begins to operate differently. He speaks less than he thinks. He reveals less than he feels. He shows less of what he intends to do, and this creates an invisible and extremely powerful layer of protection, because what cannot be predicted cannot be easily attacked. And this manifests itself in practical actions. He stops announcing his next steps before executing them. He doesn't share every goal, every plan, every move. He learns to work in silence. A direct example: while many say they're going to start a business, change their lives, invest, train, he simply does it. Without announcement, without validation. Another example, in conversations, he avoids expressing his opinion on everything. He chooses where to position himself, and when he positions himself, it's with precision. This creates weight. This creates presence. Decisions based on real human nature show that people respect more what they can't completely decipher. Mystery generates authority, and authority generates power. He ceases to be predictable and becomes strategic. Calculated use of force applied in the way he presents himself to the world. But there's an even deeper point to all of this. Being unreadable isn't just about hiding. It's also about not clinging to a single version of oneself. Constant adaptability becomes essential. He manages to adjust to the environment without losing his essence. In one context, more assertive. In another, more silent. In another, more direct. This makes him dangerous, in the best sense of the word, because nobody knows exactly how he will act, but everyone knows he is prepared, and that creates immediate respect. But this level of control and strategy begins to generate an inevitable effect. His presence changes. He no longer needs to talk so much, nor prove so much, because something within him already communicates, and that's exactly what builds the next level. The man who can no longer be ignored. After all this, something changes, but not noisily. There's no announcement, no external validation, no need to prove anything. The transformation is silent, but impossible to ignore, because now he no longer depends on words, explanations, or approval. His presence speaks for itself, and this isn't superficial charisma, it's internal construction. Machiavelli already made it clear, real power lies not in what you say, but in what you represent. And he represents control, clarity, and direction. This is perceived immediately. In an environment, he doesn't need to compete for attention. He naturally attracts, because people sense when someone is aligned with themselves. And this alignment comes from everything he has built: emotional mastery, solid skills, strategic silence, and a well-chosen circle. And the most interesting thing is that he no longer needs to force anything. The average man tries to be noticed. He is noticed, because his posture changes, his gaze changes. His way of speaking or not speaking changes, and this has a direct impact on opportunities. People begin to respect him even before they know him deeply. In negotiations, he doesn't need to pressure. His presence already sets the tone. In relationships, he doesn't beg for attention, he selects. This is better to be feared than loved in a more refined version. It's not about literal fear, but about a presence that commands natural respect. A practical example. In a meeting, while others try to stand out by talking too much, he observes, analyzes, and speaks only at the right moment. And when he speaks, everyone pays attention. This doesn't happen by chance. It's the result of consistency, of discipline, of decisions based on real human nature. But here's a crucial detail. This level isn't an endpoint. It's a new beginning, because maintaining this presence requires even more discipline than building it. The world will test you. People will try to break this pattern. Situations will challenge your emotional control, clarity, and boundaries, and that's exactly where many fall, when they start to relax. He understands that power isn't something you conquer once. It's something you maintain daily. Virtue and fortuna continue to operate, skill and opportunity. And he needs to be ready for both, because now it's no longer about proving something to the world, but about sustaining who he has become. And that requires a code, an internal standard that doesn't depend on motivation, but on constant discipline. And it's precisely this code that defines the next level. At this point, he already understood something that most never accept. Motivation is unstable. Discipline is what sustains everything. That initial emotional impulse no longer exists. There is no longer willpower guiding decisions. What exists is an internal code, silent, firm, non-negotiable. Machiavelli already showed that decisions based on real human nature cannot depend on emotion, because emotion fluctuates, and whoever fluctuates loses consistency. So he creates his own rules. Waking up at a certain time, training regardless of mood, studying even when not inspired. This isn't glamorized, it's repetitive, sometimes even boring, but that's exactly what builds something solid. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is that the winner is not the most motivated, it's the most consistent, and that demands a level of commitment that few are willing to maintain. And here comes the practical part that transforms intention into results. He stops depending on good days and starts operating with patterns. He creates a minimum non-negotiable routine. 1 hour of skill development, copywriting, editing, finance, 40 minutes of physical training, 20 minutes of strategic reading. No matter the scenario, he executes. A direct example? Even on bad days, he reduces the intensity, but doesn't break the pattern. This keeps the system working, and over time, this behavior becomes his identity. He doesn't try to be disciplined. He is. Calculated use of force appears again, but now applied against his own inconsistency. Constant adaptability also comes into play. If something doesn't work, he adjusts, but never abandons the process. The end justifies the means. Here takes on a strategic meaning. The exact path doesn't matter as long as he continues to advance consistently. And the most powerful thing about all this is that nobody sees it. There are no daily applause. There is no immediate recognition. But there is building. And silent building generates real power. Your own loyal armies aren't formed overnight. They are the result of repetition, training, and discipline. The same applies to him. Avoiding being hated here takes on a new meaning. It's not about pleasing. It's about not sabotaging yourself, because in the end, the greatest risk isn't external failure. It's abandoning your own code. And he knows this. That's why every day he chooses to stay on track. No drama, no announcements, just execution. And it is precisely this consistency that separates those who watch videos from those who build a life that few manage to achieve. Now tell me, after all this, Do you really believe you can continue living the same way? Reacting impulsively, putting yourself second, talking too much, surrounding yourself with people who don't uplift you, and still expecting a different result? Most will watch, agree, and continue as before. Because change requires something few are willing to offer: real discipline. So the question isn't whether this makes sense, the question is whether you will apply it. Because in the end, it all comes down to a silent choice you make every day. Continue being controlled, or start taking control. And let me challenge you even more. What is your weak point today? Is it the emotion you can't control? Is it the environment that limits you? Is it the lack of skill that keeps you ordinary? Or is it simply the lack of action? Be honest, because as long as you don't name the problem, you won't solve it. And there's no romanticizing this. Either you build a strong internal code, or the world builds one for you. And usually, it's not a code that favors you. So decide, are you going to continue being predictable, manipulable, replaceable? Or are you going to become someone who plays on another level? Now do this. Don't keep it to yourself. Comment below. Which of these points resonated with you the most? Where did you realize you're failing? That's the first step. And if you want to continue developing this level of clarity, strategy, and control, you already know the way. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep following. Because while most people sleep, you can choose to wake up.